Hello, this is Jeremy Mitchell, and we are back from another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have the United States spent more than roughly $5 billion so it's the 2026 FIFA World Cup from themirror.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the anti-consumption subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is if private individuals wanted to spend $5 billion so it's the FIFA World Cup, I think they should be able to, but I don't think the state should be paying it, especially not through taxpayer dollars. Maybe if taxpayers did want to earmark their money to be spent on hosting the World Cup, they should be able to. But as of right now, that's just the U.S. government throwing money at it, even if people don't want it. And I don't think that's very libertarian. The libertarian position is, if people want to spend money to host the World Cup, they should be able to, but they shouldn't be forced to subsidize the World Cup if they don't want to. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have slippery slope on the right to bear arms. Extraordinarily vindicated with Britain, posted by Amugus Devilman, and that looks like a tweet from David Shipley, who tweeted, "Just had to sign for these as the postman can only deliver them to someone aged over 18. Good news, the government is keeping us safe from knife crime." And it looks like a spoon, a fork, and a butter knife, just basic kitchen utensils. And yeah, personally, I don't think the state should be forcing people to sign to even deliver butter knives alone, or actual knives, but ultimately the state can make whatever laws they want to. It reminds me how, recently in Britain they had the Sikh guy stab a Polish guy to death, and the Sikh guy, he ultimately could carry his knife because it was, I think that they said that, Sikhs are allowed to carry knives for religious reasons, and ultimately this goes through, the state can make whatever rules it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. That's why I personally think you gotta support the right to bear arms, because if the state can ultimately, when it comes to disarming people, the state can selectively choose who and who not to disarm. That's like why the Sikh can carry the knife for religious reasons, even though, they don't let normal people, they don't even let they mail a buttered knife normally, as this guy seems to indicate. Next we have Trump mules executive order on spy powers. Let's see what happens, from thehill.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for government spy powers, but of course this is just Reddit kind of. Reddit only cares about it because it's Trump. I'm sure there are some principled people on Reddit who care about the government when it spies on you, under like Obama and Biden too, but those are few and far between. When it comes to the Reddit, it's just in-group good, out-group bad, and the Reddit will go back to excusing all the Democrats spying on people because they don't have any principles other than in-group good, out-group bad. They'll be when the Democrats just come back and justify their spying, Reddit will find a way to justify it. But ultimately, it just goes to show you a lot of people don't have really any principles, only teams. Next, we have Iowa man seen in viral body camera footage wins $105,000 wrongful arrest lawsuit from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think that's good. Normally the state doesn't hold its own accountable like that. But sadly, this is much more the exception rather than the norm. Oftentimes, the state's not going to hold itself accountable, even if some of the more activist judges might say they not like police officers. In reality, they'll rule in favor of them 9 times out of 10. Next, we have Trump wants to expel representatives who threaten to impeach him, from NewRepublic.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, I don't think Trump should be threatening to expel representatives who threaten to impeach him, but ultimately, he can say whatever he wants to, and that's freedom of speech. Reddit, if they try to impeach the next Democratic president, he said the same thing, Reddit will think it's the greatest thing ever, but since Trump's in the out-group rather than in-group, Reddit thinks this is the worst thing ever. Next, we have Maryland court rules against unconstitutional stop and frisk and victory for states' gun owners, from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think that's a good decision. I don't really usually agree with what the American legal courts say, but this is definitely the correct decision. Next we have, I don't believe in a true free market that Elon Musk would be a trillionaire, posted by Historical Donut 6758, and they added, I think the current monetary system rewards asset holders while punishing the average non-asset holder. Also, the regulatory system helps such rich people to an extent Regulatory catch or regulations benefit certain multi-billionaire industries who otherwise would not be billionaires. People love to lament about how the poor leech off to the system, but they rarely talk about how the rich leeching off the system. What do you think? And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Elon Musk's receiving of government subsidies, especially when it comes to like stuff like SpaceX. But I do think, Elon. I don't know if he'd be a trillionaire without government subsidies, but I definitely do think, he'd still be significantly well off. And of course, Reddit, Reddit used to love Elon, but then he joined the political outgroup, and suddenly he was the worst thing ever. And it just goes to show you that, ultimately, well, if Reddit ever puts you in the outgroup, that they'll think you're the worst thing ever, even if they loved you just a few years ago. It's the same thing happened to J.K. Rowling. Reddit used to love her and compare everything to the Harry Potter books, but then suddenly she says she personally doesn't think trans women are real women, and suddenly she's the worst thing ever. Just go show you, no principles, only teams. Your only principle is, agree with everything we believe, or else you're literally Hitler, and eventually you just get tired of it all. Next, we have the leftist idea of economics posted by Mugus Devilman, and that looks like a meme of a Mario kind of in shadows or something. I think there's a term for it, but I can't really remember off the top of my head. But it says, poor people watching all the food in their refrigerators disappear the instant Elon became a trillionaire. And yeah, personally, I would agree with that. Just because Elon's a trillionaire doesn't mean that other people that other people, like poor people, they're still doing relatively well for themselves on the global scale, and I think that's important to remember as well. It's basically, you have to remember that the left is built entirely off envy, and they're just very envious that they can have Elon's money. I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have SpaceX's IPO could turn 4,400 employees into millionaires from NYTimes.com, posted by Lemon Limelight, and they said SpaceX's IPO is expected to make a lot of rich people even richer. First in the queue is Mr. Musk, 54, who's likely to become the world's first trillionaire. His friends, along with Silicon Valley venture capitalists, private investment firms, and others who put money into the company, are also set to reap billions. One group will get in life-changing wealth for the first time. SpaceX's current and former employees. More than 4,400 current and former SpaceX employees are likely to become millionaires in the IPO, according to analysis by Hill.com. San Francisco-based investment platform. Of those, about 400 are expected to earn $100 million or more. With most IPOs, you're usually only going to see the founders become billionaires, says Andrew Benson, the founder and chief executive of Hill.com, who facilitated the trading of private SpaceX shares. It's uncommon to have 400 people at that threshold, or of $100 million, he added. It speaks to the enormous wealth that's being created here. And I would agree with that. Ultimately, a lot of Redditors, they may not like SpaceX because Elon's in charge, but ultimately just go to show you that, ultimately, you can still move up in America if you make the right decisions and join the right companies, and I think that's something that's important to remember as well. Next, we have GB, UK government announces further violations of internet freedom and free speech, posted by Mugus Devilman, and that's cross-post from the false libertarian subreddit, and that looks like a tweet from Liz Kendall, who tweeted, those who use social media to incite violence and disorder are breaking the law. Next week we will lay in Parliament an update to the Online Safety Act, requiring services to take quicker action to remove illegal content circulating during times of crisis, and they added, the UK government likely demand social media companies remove content on spot and censor stories from circulating under threats of heavy fines if they refuse to comply with the new law. And I personally would agree that's not a good thing. You need to support freedom of speech, but sadly, Reddit, that they're unprincipled when it comes to supporting freedom of speech. They say, oh, Trump's anti-free speech, all the while they, like the British here, want to ban anything they deem to be hate speech or misinformation, and that's inherently anti-libertarian. The libertarian perspective is for maximum freedom of speech. I think that's important to remember. It's like Noam Chomsky said, if we don't believe in free speech for those we despise, we don't believe in it at all. I think that's important. If you truly support free speech, you have to support speech you disagree with, even if you might be considered violent or in bad taste, and I think that's important to remember as well from the libertarian perspective. Next, we have AI posted by Mugus Devilman, and that's cross-post from the Anarcho-Capitalism subreddit, and it's two crying Wojaks, and one Wojak says, no, AI can't just use copyright material, and the other one says it's literally theft, and then the two ANCAP Chad Wojaks say, AI is scrapping tons of copyright data, LMAO, and the other one says, good, copyright law is nonsense. And I would agree with that. Copyright law is ultimately just subjective, and once you put something out there, that doesn't mean people shouldn't be able to do whatever they want with it. And yeah, ultimately, I think the libertarian position is, we need people to do whatever they want. Maybe they'll do some bad things such as revenge porn, which but it's just very much like guns or drugs or abortions. If you're more on the pro-choice side, like I am, ultimately, trying to make it illegal isn't going to control. It's just isn't going to control only bad. So ultimately, people are going to justify what they justify. Like any tool can be misused, but ultimately, I do think it's each individual's preference to what they want to do with the tool. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have you heard of Sect 224 of the Defense Authorization Act, which merges the military with the Israeli, therefore our tax, cyber, money, and more is shared, posted by Sky Sand. And I personally don't really care for that, but ultimately, if the U.S. government does want to justify pretty much merging with the Israeli military, ultimately we're up Israel's ass enough that I don't think it will change too much. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have one perspective from someone who advocates for a free market, posted by Historical Donut 6758, and that looks like a Facebook post or a Twitter post from Lance Savage, who tweeted, Elon Musk's influence and power are functionally unchanged, whether his net worth is just north of $1 trillion, $900 billion, $500 billion, $100 billion, or even about 50, or even $50 billion. At the level of wealth, the practical difference is mostly ceremonial. Anyone with that much money already has access, leverage, influence, inflation, and options beyond anything normal people that meaningfully comprehend. He has been one of the most powerful private citizens in there for years. The outrage over him crossing some $1 trillion threshold strikes me as mostly symbolic. It does not reveal some new danger. It does not suddenly transform into something he was not already. It just gives people a large round number around which to organize their outrage. And the fact that no small portion of my fellow Americans seem to honestly believe Musk has a Scrooge McDuck vault with $1 trillion in it, sitting there right for the picking by Comrade Sanders and AOC, is about as poor a commentary on basic human cognition as I can imagine. So net worth is not a checking account, it is not a pile of gold coins, it is not liquid cash sitting in a billionaire's basement next to a diving board. It is an estimate of ownership value, much of it tied up to companies whose value rises and falls. This is why so many of our politics and cultures become people reacting less to substantial changes in reality than emotionally satisfying symbols of things they already hated. Musk did not become powerful at $1 trillion. He was powerful long before that. The number changed more than the reality did, and therefore treating a ceremonial threshold as some civilization-altering event is every bit as ridiculous as it looks. And I would agree with that. Ultimately, Elon's going to be very influential regardless of what his total wealth is. And ultimately, I think in a lot of ways, social capital is much more important than economic capital. He controls a lot of social capital by controlling one of the largest social media platforms in X. I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Fitch upgrades Argentina to B-, and yet another Javier Milei win, posted from Reuters.com, posted by Socialists Are Morons, and they added, isn't it funny how people elect socialists over and over again, and every time it either goes to shit or ends in stagnation, and when people finally elect the free market capitalists, it almost immediately gets better. Surely that's just a coincidence. And yeah, personally, I like Milei on economics. I don't agree with him on everything. He seems to be very much up Israel's last, like the U.S. government, so that's something I definitely disagree with him on. But yeah, I definitely do think, what he's been doing in Argentina has been showing that libertarianism and its support of free market capitalist economics is probably the best way when it comes to economics, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have another GOP interference from LP.org, posted by Dr. Curious, and they added, seems crazy to me this is happening again, and that's the story. The story is Libertarian Party condemns GOP intimidation campaign against ballot qualified Iowa candidates. And yeah, personally, I don't think the GOP should be intimidating the Libertarian Party, but ultimately, they have the resources to do so. It's just like when I ran in 2022 for the State House, they sued me off the ballot, and ultimately they had the resources to do so, and I really couldn't fight back. That's very much what life is, it's who has the resources and means to justify and get away with what. And oftentimes, when you're a major party, you're going to have a lot more resources than if you're a minor party like Libertarian Party. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, here's a trick to help visualize what a trillion is, posted by Amugus Devilman, and that looks like a tweet from Melton Keynes, socialist philanthropist, who tweeted, the sheer scale of $1 trillion can be hard to comprehend. They put it in perspective. This is both the amount of California mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day and the number of years required to count them. I think that was a funny joke. But, of course, this subreddit's not going to like that because it's going after the Democrats. But, yeah, I do think that was a funny joke. Next, we have Peace President threatens the ultimate alternative against Iran, posted by Jai Porcupine, and that looks like a truth from Donald Trump, who proved Barack Hussein Obama's deal from Iran, the JCPOA, was an easy, beautiful, smooth road to a nuclear weapon, which Iran would have had 6 years ago and would have used long before now. My agreement for Iran is the opposite, a wall to no nuclear weapon. In fact, they no longer want a nuclear weapon, nor will they have one, either through purchase, development, or any other form of procurement. The deal is scheduled to get signed tomorrow. Immediately after it's signed, the Hormuz Strait is open to all. Our relationship with Iran is much better, different, and better one than the previous administrations have had. Unlike Obama's hundreds of billions of dollars in payments to them, including $1.7 billion in green cold cash, no money will exchange hands. At the appropriate time, when all is calm, we will go in and get the nuclear dust buried deep under the powerful sunken granite mountains, thanks to our beautiful B-2 bombers and the brilliant pilots in Down Mainland and Detroit, over in Iran and the United States. We look forward to working with Iran and the entire Middle East. Let's look into the future. However, this process will all work out quickly, easily, and smoothly. If it doesn't, we will have the ultimate alternative, hopefully never used again. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Trump's constant saber-rattling against Iran, but ultimately, that's very much how the U.S. presidents are. Obama was probably better on Iran with the JCPOA, as Trump mentioned, but ultimately he was probably worse on Libya as well. And I think that's important to remember. The U.S. government's always going to be bombing somewhere, regardless of which figurehead's in the White House, because ultimately, the U.S. the president's really just a figurehead first and foremost. The military-industrial complex, deep states, the Connecticut lizard people, whatever you want to call them, they're the ones really running the show. Next, we have throwing money at public schools, even doubling teacher salaries, has virtually no effect on student outcomes, from posted by Mugus Devilman, and that looks like a bunch of charts they shared supporting that. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, schools should all be private rather than public. We gotta get the state out of education, and ultimately, people want to teach kids, they should be able to. All education's going to be ideologically biased to some degree, but I definitely do think, in public schools, it's basically training children to be progressive activists. I personally don't think that's the libertarian answer. I think, if people do want to send their kids to progressive schools to change to be progressive activists, I think they should be that should be fine. But right now, you're basically forced if you can't afford private school. I think that's important to remember as well. Ultimately, I think libertarian positions, you need as much school choice as possible. If people want to have send their kids to a progressive school or conservative school or ideologically neutral school, I think they should be able to. And I think that's very much going to be the future. And if not, getting rid of school altogether, because now you have the internet and you can get pretty much, you can just teach yourself on the internet pretty much. And I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Trump explores federal government acquiring shares in AI companies, state crony capitalists reading more ballots from USAtoday.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But ultimately, the federal government can acquire whatever shares in whatever companies it wants to, and oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Nothing Says Freedom Like Forcing Someone to Reform, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross-post from the True Unpopular Opinion subreddit. President Trump should sign an executive order to require artist reform at the July 4th, 250 to make it a moment of natural unity. And yeah, I personally would disagree with that. If people do want to perform at the February Freedom 250, you should be able to, but you shouldn't be forced to perform if you don't want to. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.